and get started on our screen share, because we've got a very interesting, chapter 10 is very interesting in my mind. And you'll see why I think that is when we get started with it. So let's get to the show. Okay, so chapter 10. So we're really talking about the social discount rate, which is not super interesting, but slightly debated because of various reasons we'll talk about. Probably the most interesting thing we're going to do is talk about the cost of public funds, which everybody thinks are free, but are in fact more expensive than private funds. And then the value of information. Ooh, I keep hitting the wrong thing. Okay, so generally we're doing public projects because a private market is not providing the good or service. That's what Alexis and I were talking about. Electrical service is very hard to offer in a private market because it would be inefficient to have a bunch of providers. So we anoint one and we give them power. It's just like, actually here I can get more cable providers, but sometimes in Hawaii, the cable started to feel like a victim sometimes. It used to be the phones were funny. So a lot of times we have private markets that just don't get us what we need, so we go to public projects. And generally the opinion is that the social discount rate should be lower than the private rates. And the reason why we think that is because we're trying to look out for the well-being of people rather than make a profit. This is okay, except for there is some debate about it because public funds are not free. So we shouldn't act as if there is no other opportunities for those things, because there's a ton of opportunities for them. And so we need to be very careful of what social discount rate we're using. And again, extra consumption in the future does not yield as much satisfaction as it would now because we don't like to wait. So this kind of also complicates it. And what you'll see if you actually look at patterns in the way we do public projects and public services, and let me just pick on the most stark example. If you look at the programs that benefit seniors compared to the programs that benefit 2-year-olds and young children, you will find, I forget the percentage, like 1,000% more programs to benefit seniors, because seniors have the ability to go out there and advocate. But what's the most important thing we do? Let me just inform you, it is young children. And their mothers don't have the time to advocate for them. They don't have time to advocate for them. But, you know, that's really the group. If you want to solve problems in the schools, you look at programs that start with early childhood education and keeping kids excited about learning and keeping kids inquisitive and entrepreneurial. This is so important. But yet when we look at projects, we tend to focus on groups that are able to organize, able to market themselves, able to hire lobbyists. And also we tend to favor these big money projects, large spendy infrastructure. And then you see they put the politician's name on it. So this is kind of some of these problems that are kind of associated with this consumption issue. And nobody wants to wait, so they're just out there lobbying for what they want. And so that's very difficult, and uncertainty exists. Now, generally, if you're looking around the world, you're going to have a 4% social discount rate, but the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, and when they were working with the Pacific Island countries, when I was developing this course for them, they were recommending something like a 10 to 12% rather than this 4% that normally everybody uses. And if you look at the documents that the US government puts out, they do have a very low real discount rate that they use, very, very low. So this is some of the stuff you need to be cognizant about. I don't know that we can do much about it, but I think it's very important to think about it, particularly when we're looking at this disparity, as I just pointed out, with programs for young children. I'm constantly amazed And then you can even look at teacher salaries and wonder why these preschool teachers never really make good salaries when this is one of the most important jobs around. At the end of the day, that's where all the excitement for learning is in a young child. That's what we drum out of them when we put them in these classrooms. By the time they're in 7th grade, a lot of their creativity evaporates. So this is something I really want to always caution everyone about, that when we're looking at these social projects, it does become very difficult because we will focus on the group we care about, and it's very difficult to kind of balance all these values. This becomes very problematic. But suffice it to say that the take-home message from the assignment you'll be doing for this class is the opportunity cost of public funds is larger than the amount involved. It is in fact true. We're going to demonstrate it with the homework. And it's very important to understand this. This is because the way these projects are paid, they have to be paid out of taxes or by borrowing money. So both of those have opportunity costs, or by simply printing new money, which also has an opportunity cost because it will bring about inflation. Hyperinflation occurs in countries that are struggling, and they just start printing new money, and then their money is worthless. There's, I think in Colombia, it's a major issue right now. Therefore, before we get too deep into it, you should include the shadow price of all public funds in your benefit cost analysis, because they have a true opportunity cost. They're not free. And so many people think they are. I think the number one example that I'm most upset about today, excuse me for ranting about it, is the post office. The post office was a stellar example for many, many years. And I have argued for years that we should give up Saturday service, or maybe even Saturday and Friday, so this can break even. And now the service at the post office has gotten so bad that can't get any mail to go anywhere. So everybody's calling me, did you mail me that? Yes, I did, but heaven knows where it is. So this is one of the things with public funds, is you have to understand these opportunity costs. And when you're relying on these organizations and you've put them in place, then you need to think about, what are we really doing to keep them functioning? Or has their purpose gone away? Or how can we make this work? Because to pour all this money into an organization and then just let it drop is also got a huge opportunity cost. So this is really important that we think about this. So now we're going to get to this example. So let's say you wanted to invest in something, some public project. So you needed some money. So you sold $100 worth of public funds. So you sold bonds, right? $100 worth. So private investors basically increase their savings by $50 because they're not going to invest, and they reduce their private project investment by $50 because you're going to do a public project rather than a private project. So private investors are now going to take their money and do something else with it, i.e. save it, and also reduce their other projects because you're doing projects instead. So the opportunity cost of the lost consumption is $50, right? Because they could have been out there investing for $50, right? Then you have that lost consumption that they would have, well, no, actually they wouldn't have been investing that $50. They would have been spending that $50 on goods and services, but they saved it. And then they did not do their private project. So this lost consumption is as a result of saving money. So that reduced the economy. And then the opportunity cost of private investment is the present value of the foregone before tax return if the business would have invested the $50. So if they would have invested that $50, there would have been some profits and they would have paid some taxes, right? So we have to figure out what that is. So if you plug in the analysis right here, R star, this is the before tax return rate on the private projects. So this is the actual return rate, right? So this is the rate you actually earned minus 1 minus the taxes, divided by 1 minus the taxes. Remember when we did that example in chapter 4, which no one liked, homework 4, where we had to sit and figure out all the depreciation on this machine? This is the type of thing. So if you know what rate of return the businesses are looking for, their preferred opportunity cost of waiting, and you know their tax rate, which I think for businesses is pretty easy to get, you can plug that in there and actually get this value right here. And we have given up $83.33 because we didn't do the investing. We would have made this return in the form of profits and taxes. And every time we do these private net benefit analysis, we always worry about this. What kind of taxes are they paying? What are their profits? Where do the profits go? Do the profits stay in the community? If the profits stay in the community and the taxes come to the community, then what you had was the cost of the savings then increased by the $50, this same old $50 up here, and $83.33 because of foregone investment, which is profits and taxes that you did not get because you did the investing as a public entity rather than let a private business do it. So all in all, this little $100 worth of public funds on this project cost us $133.33. So you have one problem, the first problem on this. This is how you do it. It will give you this desired rate of return and the tax rate. You just plug it in there and it will give you the answer. So this is why we're so interested as economists and benefit cost analysts that we really account for the true cost of these public projects, because most of the time you don't. Even if it was $100 worth of tax dollars that you were spending, still, it's still costing you more because you're giving up taxes and profits that you would have had if the private company did it. So that's what we're really talking about. And that's really the danger of always relying on public projects to do everything. I know it's difficult to realize, but it's true. We've just shown it.
Assume we look at this thing and we say, okay, let's assume we look at this thing and we say, okay, we have a positive net present value, but we have some uncertainty. Now,
what are we doing? Ooh, sorry, I don't know what that is. That's me talking, but I don't know why. Sorry. Okay, so now we have the value of information about uncertainty. So this is another reality that we try to deal with it. And we're talking about delaying a project to investigate whether or not we should do it now or should we wait a year. So basically, if we delay, then we can get additional information. So this is kind of useful. So again, in this example, we've got all these variables we got to figure out, and it comes right out of your book. So K is the project cost. So this is the net benefit in year 0, and it's known with certainty, right? This is the return if the high price prevails. This is the return if the low price prevails. Then here's the probability of both of those happening. Again, all you're trying to do is figure out, should I do the project now or should I wait until I have better information? So here we go. So we either invest now and it will actually give you the formula for the expected return right here, the expected net benefit, or you can wait. And again, this is the probability that you're going to get that high return. And this is the probability that you're going to get the low return. So we calculate these two NPVs and we compare them. But remember, this NPV will be at year 1, not year 0. So you've got to move it back one more year to actually do a direct one-on-one between this one and that one. So then if we subtract the expected one immediately with the expected one, if you delay a year, then you actually get the value of information. So sometimes we're able to buy information. We hire consultants. I'm not sure that's the best use of your money, but sometimes it is useful to get more information. So basically, here's kind of the way that equation will work. If the initial investment becomes more expensive, then you're more willing to pay for information because it's a very expensive project. Let's not get in a rush. If it's very expensive, it's going to have a very long stream of benefits coming to it, as I've suggested. Otherwise, it will never get a positive NPV. So waiting a year might be a good idea. And then if this low return goes down even more, then it's even less attractive. Or if all of a sudden the bottom falls out of a market, which does happen, you think there's going to be a robust demand for this good and service, but you find out, oh, and I think we're seeing that. I don't mean to get into in the weeds here, but I think, isn't marijuana having this problem where in Oregon they have overproduction because everybody got into it and the bottom fell out of the market. So they're really struggling there because they didn't really think of the probability of a low price. They didn't really think of all these people coming online quickly because it's pretty easy to set up a grow op. So you can get into that market very quickly. So they all kind of didn't think anyone else was going to do it or they weren't going to flood the market. So I know that market actually got flooded. So they actually had this very, very low price. So had they realized in some sort of permitting system or some way to kind of get a feel for what the expansion was going to be, they would keep track of this. We see this also in housing markets. We see it in the beef market where we tend to oversupply, then the price drops, then we undersupply, then the price comes back. So it gets this cyclical thing. And this is one of the reasons that we like to spend more time really analyzing the cyclical markets, because it's very easy to overinvest because everybody doesn't really know what everybody else is doing when they're in the preparation stage. And there's no way to really share that data unless you get more information about what permits are going out, who's doing what. Really spend some time figuring out what the competition is going to be doing next year. So that would be the type of information that you're funding. And then return in the current period falls. Of course, that makes the project just less attractive. Or the interest rate falls, because as soon as that interest rate falls, then you've got some issues with trying to do your payback with your discount rate, because if your discount rate all of a sudden bottoms out, you need to know that, because that will make those future benefits look much different, or the future costs look much different. So again, the good thing doesn't really help much, but we're trying to protect against the bad stuff. Information protects us against bad stuff. That's why we're into it. So if there's no additional information to be obtained by delaying their project, then the NPV rule is to undertake the project immediately if the expected return, right, plus the RO minus that initial investment is greater than 0. So as long as that expected return, which we learned in last chapter, how to do the expected return, no, the chapter before, no, last chapter, and as long as this holds, then we can go ahead. But if additional information can be obtained by delaying, then the NPV rule is to undertake the project immediately only if this value here is greater than B. And B, let's go back and see what B is. B, where's B? B. I think that's the cost of the information. So you have one question on this and you basically have to work through that formula. There is an example in the book and it's on page 231. And it will lead you through it exactly like we did here, those calculations. So if you go to page 231, look at their examples, you do yours exactly the same, but know that when you do that NPV for the value of the information, oh, we waited a year and now we have information, know that that's going to be discounted back to year one, so you got to move it back one more year. So you just plug in your information and proceed. So I think there's only 2 questions on that assignment. And the value of the information one is as simple as just going to that formula on page 231 and finding it. I'm just looking to make sure. So it shouldn't give you that much trouble. And to be honest with you, I'm really more interested in, oh no, there's 3. So it actually gives you all the information. It tells you all the prices, all the cues. So you just lay out your formula and copy it. It's not that difficult. And you can get the 2 NPVs and compare them. And if the NPV for waiting is higher, then you should wait and get the information, the new information. But what I'm most really concerned about is this understanding that when you use tax dollars, there is an opportunity cost. So you really need to be able to understand that, and we can easily get tax rates and actually look at some of this stuff. There is information about some of these discount rates that different industries are using. So you can actually make some decisions before we start having all government projects. They're really much more expensive than we would like them to be because of the fact you're crowding out private investment. And if you don't have private investment, you don't have profits, you don't have taxes. So that is really a big concern that we need to worry about. And it's difficult because we like our projects. We like to benefit our various special interest groups and community members. So if at all possible, these private-public partnerships where you try to get the private entity to come into a market where they otherwise wouldn't come in is probably a better shake because they're actually going to be paying some taxes and managing the project in a more for-profit kind of situation. Because as we all know, you start to get government projects, and I mean, we've all heard the jokes about the $2,000 hammer or wrench that they used on the Apollo space landings, and you know, the government tends to balloon as if there is no opportunity cost. And that's why we like private projects, because that private motive helps people get things moving to their highest and best use. That's what we want. So that's that. It's 12:39, so I'm going to go over the next one, which you only have one question, and it's really the social, trying to look at how do we do projects that really are not panning out from a typical VCA. So I'm going to cut to that screen share so I can share that. PowerPoint. Slideshow. I'm not seeing it. Okay. Let me find the PowerPoint. There it is. So let's stop that share. Okay, now let's screen share again and see if we can find that PowerPoint chapter 11. This is very short. But I think it's very interesting. because it really talks about something that I think is very important. Now, economists do things to kind of look at how income is distributed, and we have two different kind of ways we do things. We have Lorenz curves, which kind of talk about who's above average income, who's below average income, where all of our households are placing. And we actually can come up with what we call Giannini coefficients, which talk about the amount of disparity. So if you have a community that you're trying to argue that they're disadvantaged, you can actually get these Lorenz curves and Giannini coefficients that will explain to you how unequal this community is compared to other communities. So if the first case you need to make is that your community is underprivileged and they're facing socioeconomic issues that are more difficult than other areas. And I think for me, the place that always came to mind for me was the Waianae Coast. How many times I went to Washington trying to get projects for them, and so many times I would go there and come up with some grand idea, and I would come home and it would go to Molokai because their state representative, or their senator, was really into Molokai. I think I let loose like 3 or 4 of those things, and they would not get it for Waianae, but they would get it for Molokai, which was also a very difficult situation, very big socioeconomic problems. So the more information you have, the better off you are. And you can actually use Lorenz curves, which really talk about if it was equal as you went up, from 0 to 100% of income, income for the population, would be a 45-degree curve. But if it's bowing, that means 30 to 40% of the if it's bowing downward, kind of concaved upward, and the bottom is bowing towards the bottom of the curve, that means that a large percentage of the population is not making an equal share. So you can actually get Giannini coefficients to make the case that this is a problem. So that's the first thing you do, is establish that your community is at a disadvantage and they do have lower incomes. And that's how you would do that, by looking at these Lorenz curves and Giannini coefficients to document the fact that this is a disadvantaged community. Then when you actually go into this, then you need to figure out what projects would help resolve the problem. This is probably the most difficult thing you do. It's easy to say a project is going to resolve the problem, but it's another thing to actually do it. This is very difficult, and I also recommend looking at some of these ideas that are really hinging on how do we know we have an effective nonprofit or government sector. So there's a lot of things you can do, but you really want to be demonstrating this long-term impact and community change, basically relative to income. Very difficult to do. It is something that's caused a lot of stress because a lot of people will start these projects, particularly nonprofits in Hawaii. For example, fish ponds are very popular. Hawaiian culture is very popular. So the premise is that if you put money in these programs, it will make the community better off, but it's very hard to establish those linkages. So you really want to spend some time with the project, making sure that it's actually going to produce the results that you're wanting. So that's a difficult thing. So usually when you're looking at those sorts of things, there's something called a logic model, which you can read about in Wikipedia, which really helps you kind of plan out what are the outcomes of your project. And what you're really looking for in a benefit cost ratio is that it is actually going to result in more incomes going to this disadvantaged group in the community. And you're now going to be able to identify exactly who those might be, because you will have this Lorenz curve with these Giannini coefficients showing who's disadvantaged and how much they're disadvantaged. So that's really requiring a lot of research. And then also to come up with the project is very difficult. I've spent a lot of time trying to come up with projects that say benefit the homeless. Very difficult to do because you have a transient workforce which won't show up in a given day, that doesn't necessarily have the skills you need. Probably the only one I've ever seen that worked really well is recycling, picking up cans and stuff, because in New York, because that's a workforce that can show up and not requiring much skills, but can work when they want. So it's very difficult to come up with projects that will actually increase the income for the poor. And we have kind of two distributions that we're focusing on. One is atemporal. So you're looking at, okay, here's everybody in the community, and there's the poor people and the richer people, and we want to put them into groups by their income levels. And that's what the Lorenz curves helps it do, because it actually tracks the distribution of different income levels. And then secondly, which is kind of the thorny part of this, which I don't like, but it is real, we have intertemporal. So atemporal is the same time periods among different groups. Intertemporal is over time. And the problem here is that saving is better than consumption. And the poor cannot save because they just can't afford to save. So this is another problem why the rich get richer, is because they're able to save. And there's a built-in bias when you do CBA due to the intertemporal nature and the present value of extra savings versus spending. If you spend your money, it's gone, that's it, it's current consumption. But if you're saving, it gives you more consumption ability at another time. So that ends up having more present value than consumption. So this really messes with us because the poor can't save. This is why we see a lot of interest in programs to help the poor save, to educate them about how to save, try to educate people about finance and what this all means, and trying to match for poor people. A lot of these programs that match every dollar they save with a dollar from a donor, very powerful, and it really addresses some of this intertemporal problem, which we're going to look at in just a minute. So here's kind of how it goes. So you have this income group, 30,000, 40, and 50,000. The mean income is 35,000. So let's look at the marginal MPS. What the heck is that? Marginal propensity to save. So every time you get an extra dollar, a new dollar, how much do you save and how much do you spend? You notice the poor spend quite a bit of all the new dollars they're going to get. So if you get them a new project, they're going to tend to spend more. Then up here, the richer people are only spending, half of every new dollar that they get. The rest is going into their savings account or their investment for their retirement accounts. So we see we have two projects here. We have this project and we have this project. And if you were in group R3, you would probably want this one because you're going to get more money. And if you were group R2, you'd probably want this one because you're going to get more money. And if you look at this, probably R2, R3 would have an easy time winning. So if you're trying to help this lower socioeconomic group, clearly they want this one. And the only group that's really going to argue is probably this one, because this one actually makes the same amount. It's only $10 less, but still. So let's kind of talk about how we can do this. So we have the mean income. The elasticity of the mean income with respect to an increase in income is 2. What does that mean? The elasticity of mean income. So this is how mean income will change as income increases. And the premium on savings relative to consumption is 20%. So you're really putting a premium on their ability to save as compared to these people who spend like crazy because they don't have any money. So they can't save. They have to support themselves, feed themselves, and pay their rent. So here's kind of how you do it. So project A, the unweighted benefits would be 125 compared to 140. So unweighted, of course, everybody's going to go with B. So if you didn't want to go with B, then you would have to weight these things. And here's how you do it. There's a formula on page 248, not in the new book, because we're not using the new book. So here's the mean income right here. So that goes here. And then YI, here's YRG1, YRG2, YRG3. So you just plug that in the formula and you will get a different weight for each one of these, right? So here's RG1, 35 on the top, 30 on the bottom, and you square it because there's just 2 time periods, right? And this one is squared. Oh no, this is the elasticity of marginal utility. So that's 2 because that's the elasticity of the marginal utility, sorry. So this is the 40 and this is the for 35. So that gives us weight. So in essence, you've got a weight, which you notice will weight this one much higher than it would before, and so on and so forth. But still, you notice we're going to end up with project B, even though we're really weighting this one very heavily. And the elasticity of marginal utility with respect to an increase in income should be available from a secondary government source because they calculate all this stuff. They calculate all of our savings rates. This is why they go so crazy about us not saving. They're constantly complaining about it. They worry about it. And then if we wanted to calculate saving and consumption for each group, then you have to have another weighting where you're actually accounting for how much they're saving and how much they're spending. You're putting a premium of 20% on savings. Where did we get that? 20% on savings. So the value of savings is 1.2 because this dollar in consumption and a dollar in savings, this savings is really worth 1.2 for every dollar in consumption. So that's what we're using here. And what is this? This is how much they're actually saving because we had 30,000 marginal propensity to save. So what are they saving? 30,000 multiplied by 0.05, not very much. So of this money they're making, they're going to spend $47.50. They're going to save $2.50. This weight we've already calculated before. It's right here. That's the weight of consumption. And this is the weight for savings. And what still makes this not look attractive is the fact that we're really getting a lot of benefit out of all this savings these people are doing. So even then, it doesn't going to look attractive. So this is going to be a very difficult one to save if we go in there arguing for this low income group because none of these MPVs look better for project A. So in spite of all this, it's very hard to pull this out of the hopper. But if you can, this is the approach to use where you use that information about the amount of people in that low income group and try to come up with projects that actually have bigger numbers here than they do here. This one is, I think, from the book, but you see that this is not really easy to do because this one actually does pretty good for this high income group. They're pretty happy with it. And the next lower income group is pretty happy with it too. So, and these people are not suffering that much as a result of it. So even with this weighting approach, it's hard to make this thing look attractive. But I don't really think this was the problem. What I really think is the problem is coming up with projects that actually help the poor. That is difficult because what you're really wanting to do is produce better incomes for them. It's very difficult to identify the projects. So that's really the difficult thing. And that's not what this course actually teaches us. What this course teaches us is how to go in there and work with the numbers to do a better sales pitch for projects that do benefit the poor. And the way you do that is through these weightings and all this data about savings and all these things. You can go to assumptions like the Waianae Coast. Maybe they don't value savings that much because their banks there are not really doing much loans, or maybe they have other support systems where they don't need to worry about savings as much. I mean, there's different options, particularly with subsistence, that help. So that does give you ammo to change some of your base assumptions that savings is so much better than consumption. That might be one you could play with a little bit, because in the Waianae Coast, for example, it just seems to me that the people that are saving are probably the ones driving to town, and that we really need to worry about that other group, and they really are focused on consumption. So we might be able to pull down that premium of savings in order to deal with some of these stuff, to kind of bring up their consumption levels to the point where they can meet some of these demands initially to get through the week, and then they can start to think about the month and the year and the 5 years, because if you can't feed yourself this week, it's difficult to go forward. So that's that. There's only one problem. It should be pretty easy. And I didn't assign more because these are very difficult situations when you try to find the projects. This is what drives me crazy the most, is finding the projects that benefit the poor. Extremely difficult to identify them because they're just not a one size fits all for the issues. And so it's difficult to find things that will really, really work for them and produce better situations. So that's where I actually spend most of my time, is really trying to find what could we do that would work. It's easy when you have the resources to find projects. That's easy. But when you don't have resources and you're trying to find projects to earn income, very difficult. So anyone has questions? So we got one more lecture. I'm trying to line Sienna up next Monday to do her aquarium fishery thing, because it has such a great analysis of the different stakeholder groups. It's the best one I've ever seen. So I'm trying to line her up. We'll finish the lectures tomorrow. And then I can do another BCA overview, but I thought it'd be best to just have Sienna do hers on next Monday. And then most of us sitting here and here are moving right along. So I would urge you to try and get these assignments caught up. The 2 case studies as a final project that I posted, I estimate it takes about 8 to 10 hours to complete that. I will help you. You can email me, whatever. You can also take incompletes. That's fine with me. We just need to get something identified and move past it. Just get a project from start to finish. So I have a lot of experience with the 2 case study final project I posted, and it takes about 8 to 10 hours to set it up and write a pretty simple report. And I'm not looking for much. I'm just looking that you're able to explain what you did on that spreadsheet. If you made assumptions, I want you to be able to explain them. Any questions? Okay, so we're going to stop the recording.